Good evening. Welcome to tonight's call. Now, tonight we're here gathered to say no to a new arms race and yes to peace, safety, and accountability. We'll begin in just a few moments. So take this time, please, to get comfortable, grab a snack, kick off your shoes, and settle in with us. I know it's already dark and cold out for many of you, as it is for me here at the Win Without War headquarters. And for those of you joining in from the West Coast and further west and otherwise and in between, maybe you're still on your commute. So thank you truly for showing up tonight. Now, as folks trickle in and settle in, we've got leaders in our lineup who you can trust, who are going to help us make sense of this moment, and more importantly, show us what we can do about it. Just an FYI for everyone, this webinar will be recorded for the folks who couldn't join us tonight. And you are able to send questions in as we go along, so don't feel the need to wait if you're eager. If you don't know me, I'm your host this evening. I'm Sophia Guerra, Government Relations Associate at Win Without War. And I'm super grateful to be in community with you all tonight because this isn't just another policy webinar or Beltway conversation, of which I have had many. And I'm grateful because this is about threading the needle between the world that we're living in and the future that we want to build. So before we dive into our speakers, as you can see here, I just wanted to take a few minutes to frame why we're here tonight. Now, over the past few months, we've seen the world get pulled into more and more dangerous cycles of violence, from US strikes off the coast of South America to the looming threat of military deployments to our own cities in the US. And throughout it all, the same system that fuels endless war keeps telling us that we can't afford healthcare, that we can't afford housing, or climate solutions. But here's what too few people know. In just 100 days now, or just a semester, or the amount of time it takes to, say, get a surgery scheduled, in 100 days, the New START treaty, the last remaining treaty limiting US and Russian nuclear arsenals, will expire. That means for the first time in decades, we risk repeating history, sacrificing entire communities, gutting cleanup programs, and wasting billions that should be funding care and not looming catastrophe. It's a dangerous, costly, and entirely preventable step backward. And if we don't raise our voices now, that risk of repeating history is only going to increase. So tonight, we're not here just to talk about treaties or policy for policy's sake. We're here to connect the dots between nuclear policy and public health, between bloated weapons budgets and the everyday needs being neglected. Healthcare premiums are rising. Families are struggling to afford food and energy. And communities on the front lines of climate disasters are being told there's no money for recovery. We all know this, and that's why we're here, and why we're grateful to have you here focusing on nuclear weapons, even when there are so many things on our minds. And all the while, these communities are left in need. Billions are being poured into weapons that could very well end the world and not be here for the survival of it. Because it's a clear strategy to flood the zone with crisis after crisis, and yet we are all here today because we are clear-eyed. So we're here to demand that our leaders stop the march towards another nuclear arms race and invest in the kind of safety that you can't get from building more missiles. Dozens and dozens of grassroots and civil society organizations this week across the country are taking action on this 100-day marker to remind policymakers that we're watching. And that unlike in the 1940s, we have frontline communities turned seasoned advocates who know firsthand the harm of nuclear weapons use, production, and testing. And we know that the Trinity test alone caused 48 states to become coated in radioactive particles. And we know what keeps us safe, and that going full steam ahead on nuclear weapons is not it. Now, I can't think of a better group of people to talk to about this today than the folks we have with us on this call right here in front of you. We have with us award-winning playwright, Utah downwinder and activist Mary Dickson, legislative strategist Allen Hester with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and organizer Maylene Hughes with Physicians for Social Responsibility, Los Angeles. And later, we will also be joined by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Everyone can feel free, like I said, to drop questions in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll get them answered in the last segment of our call. Now, without further ado, let's start with Mary, who's graciously agreed to kick us off. Very quickly, though, if you're not familiar with her, Mary Dickson has spent years fighting for justice for those harmed by U.S. nuclear weapons testing, especially Utah downwinders and other communities who were exposed to radioactive fallout during the Cold War and even today from nuclear waste. Her tireless advocacy, along with her peers, has been instrumental in pushing for the extension and expansion of the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act and reminding us that nuclear weapons are not a distant or future danger. They are already shaping lives, bodies, and entire communities. Mary, thank you so much for being here. I'd love to invite you to kick us off, and then we'll come back to you with
Sure.
a couple of questions, but you have the floor.
Sure. Sophia, first of all, thank you so much. And thanks to Win Without War. It's really a pleasure. I've been on panels with the other panelists before, so it's really an honor. As you said, I come at this issue of nuclear disarmament from a very personal perspective. I'm not an arms control nor treaty expert, and I'm not even part of an official organization, but I have been an activist for the past 40 years. I've spoken a lot about being a survivor of nuclear weapons testing on our own soil during the Cold War arms race. I grew up in Salt Lake City, which is downwind of the Nevada test site. We're only 240 miles away. And that test site is where 100 nuclear bombs were detonated above ground between 1951 and 62, and where detonations continued underground until 1992. So, like other kids I grew up with, I drank milk from a local dairy, I ate vegetables from the garden, played in puddles of rainwater, and ate snow mixed with sugar, pretending it was ice cream. And all that while, a silent poison that would later lead to thyroid cancer was threading its way through my body. And like so many of my neighbors, friends, and family, I have lived with the lingering consequences of nuclear weapons. I survived my cancer, but too many others I know and love weren't as fortunate. When I consider the countless people across the country and the world who've been harmed all along that nuclear chain, from weapons development, production, and testing to waste storage, the human toll is actually catastrophic, and we were all deemed expendable for the sake of nuclear deterrence. And the devastating legacy of suffering that was created by that arms race didn't end when the explosion stopped. People are still being diagnosed, their cancers return, they suffer health complications, face crippling medical bills, and I have to say, the psychological damage runs deep. You always worry about what will hit you next. And worse, we've learned that the genetic damage can be passed to the next generations, which is why it's just unbelievable to me that we are finding ourselves at this dangerous inflection point. Sophie referred to it, global tensions flare, and the specter of nuclear conflict is resurfacing. We're on the brink of a new and even more dangerous arms race as nuclear nations are building up their arsenals and already making preparations for the possible resumption of testing. I mean, we already have 12,000 nuclear weapons on this planet, and even the smallest of those is 30 times more powerful than the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And as you said, the New START treaty is set to expire in 100 days, and now other nations are looking at adding nuclear weapons to their own arsenal up for national security. And I just have to keep saying, as someone who's lived with the consequences, nuclear weapons do not make us safer. One accident, one miscalculation puts our very existence at risk. The only real security rests with arms reduction and elimination. And those of us who have lived with the devastating and ongoing consequences of nuclear weapons have an important role to play in that because our insights and perspectives are as important as those of policymakers, uh, political leaders, think tanks, and weapons experts. Our voices must be part of any discussion of our nuclear future because each story of loss, suffering, and grief represents hundreds, even thousands more. And each one of our stories takes nuclear weapons out of the realm of the abstract and drives home the very real effects these weapons have on actual human beings. We know firsthand what they do to innocent civilians. Our lived experience can serve as a powerful warning of what's at stake for all of us. Nuclear weapons, which can never be used and do not make us safer, cannot be part of our future. And that's why I do this work, because ultimately that's the real justice for all of us, is getting rid of these weapons and ending the threat.
Thank you, Mary. I couldn't think of a better way to frame this conversation. As you said, we're watching a nuclear weapons buildup take shape, even
Yeah.
as cleanup programs from St. Louis to New Jersey to Indiana are being gutted. And radiation exposure compensation, of course, is still out of reach for many impacted communities.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how it feels to see this kind of cycle repeating? And
Yeah.
what message would you want policymakers to hear right now?
Sure, sure. Because I mean, a large part of my work, I'd say the bulk of it in recent years has been to expand and extend compensation under RECA. That program provided a lifeline to a lot of people, but it was always far too limited in scope. And even though we saw it expanded last July, it didn't go as far as we wanted it to. It added all of Utah, Idaho, and New Mexico. My family's now eligible after all these years for compensation, but it's only a partial victory. So it made it incredibly bittersweet when so many people I worked with so hard for so long aren't included. Our work is going to have to continue as we make sure the government owns up more fully to the mistakes of the past. So while we're celebrating this victory, it's kind of like a friend of mine said. He always said, all of our victories are temporary. They always have been. We have to get ready to keep working, and our work is not done. So I've learned that the way to make a difference is to work with others. We didn't make much of a dent in expanding that bill until we joined together with NGOs like the Union of Concerned Scientists, like the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and allies in Congress and others. But it's very ironic to me that while the government passed the expansion, essentially admitting responsibility, we find ourselves where we are today because a new arms race and will inevitably create more casualties all along the way. And we're also seeing that radioactive sites from weapons development and storage across the country have yet to be remediated. So I find it ironic that we can even think about starting this whole international disaster again.
Yeah, that really resonates, especially knowing that many member of Congress or a few members of Congress behind closed doors have said that the bill for this is just too much, that
Yeah,
we can't foot the bill for that. But of
yes,
course, communities are set to, and
right.
new ones are set.
Well, and you know, the thing is, you look at the cost, and it is a sliver, a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of what we spend on nuclear weapons. I mean, we're investing over the next 30 years, how many trillions of dollars into nuclear weapons? So to say we can't afford it to me is just not true. It's not true.
Certainly. And of course, we'll come back to each of our speakers by the end of this call, everyone, but wanted to kind of round out your segment by asking, what does justice look like for your community?
That's a really good question. I think I see it as acknowledging and recognizing what those weapons have done to us. It's good to see renewed interest in our stories, but I think it's important that those stories are amplified. I'm always amazed how many Americans don't know what 928 nuclear tests did to our own citizens. So when people ask me, well, what can we do? I say, begin by sharing our stories. Justice is also, as I said, making sure we have a place at the table so that policymakers understand the ongoing consequences of these weapons and that they can translate our lived experience into policy and action. I know Daryl Kimball from the Arms Control Association asked me once, what do you consider nuclear justice? And I thought about it and said, well, the ultimate justice is that for us to bring the nuclear age to an end. That's the ultimate justice. Don't let this happen to other people. We've got to prevent this from happening to future generations.
Thank you so much, Mary, especially considering new epigenetic research that really is ringing
Yeah,
true even without a new nuclear arms race. And thank you for grounding us in truth and in the people and places that have paid the highest price. Uh,
great.
but also want to take a step back quickly and look at the policy side of all of this. Allen, you have worked for years on arms control and nuclear policy with Congress, helping connect the dots between what happens in international treaties and situation rooms and what that means for everyday Americans. Can you, for people who are not aware, um, kind of get us started with what exactly New Start is and what it means when it expires in 100 days?
Well, first of all, I just want to echo Mary, Sophia, and say thank you for the invitation. And it's just great to see FCNL alum continue to do great work on this issue. And I hope that everyone on the call knows Sophia and Win Without War have been really crucial in so much of the advocacy that's happening to talk about members, to talk to members about the 100 days out from New Start expiration, and to talk about preventing a nuclear arms race. So it's just great to be a partner with Win Without War in this moment in general. To zoom back to New Start and what it is and why it's important and why we're commemorating that 100 days out from its expiration. I will start off wonky and I'll get simpler as I go.
Mhm.
So, on a wonky level, New Start is the last bilateral agreement between the US and Russia that limits both countries' deployed nuclear weapons. In other words, thanks to the New Start Treaty, both countries can only have 1,550 nuclear weapons ready to go at any given time. It also requires both countries to be honest about what they're doing with their nuclear weapons, right? So we're talking about visiting each other's nuclear sites. We're talking about sharing data on one another's arsenals with each other. We're talking about regular talks between the two countries to maintain that very complex relationship. So, in other words, again, it's an agreement that provides a baseline relationship between both countries. And that allows those countries to better figure out how they want to move forward and further manage that precarious relationship. So, for example, as folks on this call are making the call to move towards further reductions and to move towards a world without nuclear weapons, the New START Treaty kind of provides a baseline of understanding for those follow on conversations and I think more prophetic calls to happen, right? And to avoid things like miscommunication and accidents. So, to put it even more simply than that, if New START were to go away in February without a follow on agreement, without a temporary agreement between Putin and Trump saying that we will abide by the limits of this treaty as we negotiate a follow on agreement, we risk nuclear weapons anarchy between two countries that have 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. And I think that that really is the moment that brings us all together, right? Is a shared desire, I think, to prevent and avoid nuclear anarchy in a way that we haven't seen in probably 35 years with the Cold War.
Yeah, Alan, that was a very succinct explanation. Um, Wanted to bring this back to a more recent development. President Putin recently said that Russia would stick to the previously agreed upon treaty limits for one more year if the US did the same. Now, what should we make of that, and how should the US respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think I've been asked this question in a couple different rooms. The question of should we take Putin's offer seriously or is he genuine? And I always love to say, I can never these days guess how genuine a politician is when they say or do anything, because you always have to wait to see if it matches their actions and their policies, right? But I will say that the offer from Russia to extend the treaty limits for an additional year, giving both countries time to negotiate a more verifiable follow-on agreement that's ratified, et cetera, that just makes good sense. Right. Like it was directly in line with the recommendations we were saying the administration should pursue and offer to Russia. And it just seems that Russia maybe beat them to that offer. So I'm not a mind reader on the genuineness of the offer, but I do think Putin and Trump have multiple reasons to avoid a nuclear war and an expensive nuclear arms race, right? Even if that is selfish reasons, like this gets in the way of me maintaining and consolidating power. A nuclear war is not in their interest. I mean, I look back at the Biden administration. Putin openly said a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. And he said that before he did nuclear threats, right? As it relates to Ukraine. And so often, what I felt during that time was Putin is aware that he gets more out of making threats about these weapons than actually ever using them, right? Like he gets the political capital of, I have nuclear weapons, remember that, don't take actions against me, deterrence, than he does actually entering into a nuclear war with anybody, right? So I think just in terms of what makes good, common, rational sense in this moment, Putin's offer does make good, rational sense. And I know that when a reporter asked Trump about that offer from Russia, we did hear Trump say that he thought it was a good idea. We have not gotten an official response from the White House about that offer. We're still waiting for that. But I would also just say that we have also not received a broader national security strategy from the White House. And so I think there is some reason to think that the reason there has not been an official response is because that debate is still happening internally within the administration. But we will definitely be, I think, proposing to members of Congress that it is a good idea for Trump to pursue this and to pursue not just limits on New START, but if Trump has an idea of a better deal that he can get out of this negotiation, that we would support that as well, as long as there's good faith diplomacy as the end goal, right? So I think there is a lot of reasons to believe that that offer is something that would be upheld. And at the same time, there's definitely going to be voices in the US who, given that temporary agreement timeframe, the longer that we sit in a temporary agreement between Putin and Trump, the less we have a verifiable legal agreement that I think provides a lot more trust and verification and more buy-in from policymakers. So there will still be people under that world that will be saying, well, we don't really know what Russia's up to, even if they say X, Y, and Z. It will just make the issue more complicated the longer we sit in that unverifiable situation. So they need to pursue negotiations as quickly as possible and get a negotiated settlement as quickly as possible. And I also support a temporary agreement in the meantime.
Right. At the very least, it seems like this is an opportunity for President Trump to actually follow through on his word and say, hire a negotiating team and start that long process towards a verifiable treaty. Um, Now, since we're running a little bit behind, we'll come back to you though, since I'm seeing we're getting a few questions for each of you already. Um, but I wanted to bring in Maylene for a second. Now, Maylene Hughes is an organizer with Back from the Brink and Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles, whose day-to-day work includes getting everyday Americans involved in this very high level, often elite dominated issue. Maylene, welcome, by the way, and thank you so much for all of your hard work. This is not easy doing this on the ground organizing work. But I wanted to ask, you've helped mobilize communities that don't always see themselves as part of the nuclear conversation. How do you see this 100 days moment, and why does it matter to movements beyond nuclear focused ones?
Yeah, of course. And I just want to thank you so much for having me here today to speak in front of everyone, um, alongside Mary and Allen. They're great, incredible, very knowledgeable people. Um, but I see this 100 days moment as a real call to action. I think that this is a really critical window for all of us, not only those who are in the nuclear abolition space already, to come together and to build power, because this is honestly an issue that touches everyone. And so everyone should be involved in this conversation. And I believe the House of Dynamite release that dropped on Netflix couldn't have come at a better time because it's helping bring the conversation about nuclear weapons and accountability into the mainstream to people who might have not seen themselves already in this part of this movement before. Um, so for so long, we've been talking about this among ourselves, organizers, advocates, policy people, and now the conversation as we see today is expanding. And when more voices join in, that's when people in power start to listen. So these next 100 days are all about harnessing that momentum and organizing across movements and making enough noise that Congress can't ignore, because the nuclear issue isn't separate from everything else. And in my organizing work, that's what I've been trying to show people, is that it's deeply connected to struggles for climate justice, racial justice, healthcare, housing, economic security, and so much more. It's about protecting the health and the safety of our communities. And that's including now and for generations to come. Because at the end of the day, nuclear weapons are a threat to all of us. And in the case of a nuclear war, there is no such thing as a safe community. And that's why this moment matters so much, because we finally have a chance to bring everyone into the fight and stop it before it gets even worse.
Thank you, Maylene. Now, I'd love to hear you talk a little more about, you know, for many people, nuclear policy feels really abstract and disconnected from daily life. What have you found what have you found helps people understand this issue as real and relevant to their lives in your organizing?
Yeah, that's a great question, because for those of you who don't know, like, I'm fairly new to the movement. I've been introduced to it like almost 3 years, but about 2.5 years now. And so I'm very new to the movement. But since then, I've thrown myself into it, become passionate, and tried to connect it to everyone's daily life, because being myself, being part of the younger generation and speaking to my peers, this is not something that we really pay attention to or have heard about. Um, and I think that the key to making nuclear policy feel real is meeting people where they're at and connecting it to what they already care about. So, like, most people don't wake up thinking about nuclear weapons. And I didn't either until now. In my organizing, I always start with the local impact. I remind folks that the money our government spends maintaining and upgrading nuclear weapons, trillions of dollars at that, is money that are not going to things in our communities that people actually need. Like, and it couldn't come at a better moment with SNAP being taken away. Like, that is something that is so crucial, and that's going to hurt millions of Americans. And we need to find a better solution. Like, we're giving money to these nuclear weapons, but we're taking monies from families in need. So that money can go to things like that: healthcare, housing, education, climate solutions. When you frame it in that way, people start to see how nuclear policy isn't just some faraway issue. It's shaping the kind of future that we're living in right now. And I also talk about the communities who have already paid the price. Indigenous nations, uranium miners, downwinders like Mary, frontline workers. These are not abstract policies. They're real people who have suffered from testing, production, and contamination. And it shows that nuclear weapons aren't just a global threat, they're a local injustice. And I found that storytelling is one of the most powerful tools that we have. When people hear directly from those who are impacted, or when they see how this fight connects to their values and their struggles, it does become personal to them. Because at the end of the day, my goal isn't to make everyone an expert on nuclear policy. I am far from an expert. I'm just an ex-student turned organizer, and it's time to make folks realize that they have a stake in this. Everyone has a stake in this. This fight is about their health, their families, the world we're leaving behind. Once people see that, they understand that this work matters and that they can do something.
Thank you, Maylene. That makes a whole lot of sense on the telling stories angle. I mean, gosh, if you look at the letterboxd reviews on House of Dynamite, you'll see people extremely angry at the system that that story is portraying, which is unfortunately a pretty accurate system, an accurate story. Um, but I wanted to get into a little of your expertise on organizing. Um, we've talked before about how, this work isn't just DC lobbying, even though it can seem like that's enough. It's also about local work and community education and even faith outreach. Could you share how groups like yours approach what you call that kind of engagement ladder, giving people different ways to plug in?
Yeah. So in my work with Physicians for Social Responsibility Los Angeles and the Back from the Brink campaign, a big part of what I've been doing is turning policy into people power. And since April, I've been helping organize lobby meetings with members of Congress to build support for House Resolution 317, that was introduced in April, which is now at rough 37, 38 co-sponsors, and 11 of those are from where I'm from, California. And I've been in 9 out of the 11 of those meetings, um, plus many more with representatives that have not yet co-sponsored. But we've been doing our best in California to try to get meetings, to try to talk to our members of Congress and to have them co-sponsor and to show leadership on this issue. And what's made them powerful is that we're mobilizing real constituents in this meeting, people who may not think of themselves as part of the nuclear movement, but care deeply about their communities. And then a few months later, we even got a companion resolution introduced into the Senate, which is Senate Resolution 323. So in terms of building that constituent power, I use PSRLA's member list and pulled together folks in each of these districts and asked them to show up to these meetings. They've been doctors, environmental justice allies, professors, students, people from all walks of life. They show up and simply say, "Me too." In these meetings. And that local connection really matters because members of Congress want to hear from their constituents. They're the people who put them in office and like have them like help them keep their job. And it shows members that their communities are watching and want them to take action. Um, but this connects to what I call the engagement, giving people different ways to plug into the movement depending on who they are and like what makes sense for them. Some might start by signing onto our local elected officials letter to Congress, which builds local government leadership on this issue. Others might help pass a Back from the Brink resolution in their city or host an event to raise awareness. And a great example of that is with our new local elected official sign-on letter, which is going to Congress from local elected officials across the country, asking them to co-sponsor these resolutions, this House resolution and the Senate resolution. But the mayor of West Hollywood signed on to our letter and then later reached out to me personally. And she shared that her grandmother was one of the original founders of Women Strike for Peace, which was such a special connection. And so we met and we talked about collaborating and like how we can work together. And one idea that came out of that meeting was the city of West Hollywood passing its own Back from the Brink resolution. And so if that happens, we'll have the mayor and the city council sign on to our letter. We have EJ allies and constituents in that area engaged and a resolution in place. Then we can go back to Representative Laura Friedman, who represents that district, and show her that her community is active on this issue and wants her to lead. And another cool thing is that 2 other cities in her community, Burbank and Glendale, we passed a proclamation back in 2023 with a student group in Burbank, and one city council member from Glendale also signed on to our letter. So all like these 3 different cities in her district want her to take action. And so that should get her to listen. And that's what the ladder of engagement looks like in action. From constituents to faith leaders, EJ advocates, students, local officials, and even members of Congress. Everyone has a role to play. And when we move together at every single level, that's how we build the power we need to create real change.
Thank you so much for that, Maylene. That's such a powerful reminder for us and a really nice way to paint a picture for us of how you might start with talking to a few of your neighbors, and that might kind of snowball. and you might find allies where you didn't expect to find them. So thank you so much for that. Um, Now I am honored to introduce the Congresswoman who has been waiting patiently, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Hello, of Michigan's 12th Congressional District, someone who leads with moral clarity, who's been a consistent voice for peace, accountability in the communities too often left out of national security debates on nuclear weapons issues in particular. She's been one of a handful of members of Congress to speak out for multilateral disarmament and transparency, co-sponsoring both resolutions that Maylene has talked about today. And we're so grateful to have her with us tonight to share a few reflections on what's at stake, what leadership looks like in this moment, and whatever else she wants as
No,
well.
thank you all so much. I've been listening. Thank you, of course, to Win Without War. But of course, thank you, Mary, Allen, Maylin, for your call to move with urgency, and understanding what is at stake. We all know, and I think everyone listening and can sense that, the clock is ticking down toward the expiration of the New START. We must do everything in our power to prevent a new destructive nuclear arms race. Um, Even colleagues that have served before me understand that urgency, but it's been quieter than I wished it was when I got into Congress. I mean, we have some grassroots organization and advocates here that have been sounding the alarm for a long time. And many of us already know that a nuclear war must never be fought, as we've heard today, and even the testing, the maintenance, the expansion of these weapons stockpiles have life-shattering consequences for so many of our neighbors and families. And we know that the nonproliferation is not only essential for international peace, but it's an environmental justice issue. It's a health justice issue. It's also an anti-colonial issue. As many of our indigenous communities will tell you, there are nations in our country continue to suffer the devastating harms of violent U.S. nuclear tests. These communities deserve serious compensation and reparations, as do downwind communities like Mary's. And this must be a core demand in our stand against nuclear weapons. And I think folks talked about this, the importance of talking about the fact that our new nuclear arms race today would mean more destruction, more deadly cancer, more injustices for our communities. And we can't allow it. We've seen it again, how dangerous today in this dangerous very moment. We need to push this administration to immediately negotiate a successor to New START and to negotiate new agreements to cap and reduce nuclear arsenals, especially with Russia and China. But I'm talking to the choir. Many of you all know that we must organize and fight until we achieve the complete and total abolition of nuclear weapons. These are tools of death. I know it sounds dramatic, but we just got to talk about it that way. I think we got to talk about how violent it is. But this is like with the power to wipe out entire cities and generations of life. This is real. This is not a movie. This is not something that's made up. But we must fight for life. Sadly, again, too many of my colleagues, and I don't know if many of you know this, they're deeply financially invested right now in endless wars and an arms race. We now officially spend over $1 trillion on the Pentagon, who hasn't passed an audit, like 7 audits in a row, not to mention the tens of billions of dollars now being spent on ICE and further militarization of our streets and attacks in our neighborhoods. I know it's disgusting, and I know my colleagues get mad at me when I say members of Congress benefit from death, personally own stock in, war manufacturing. Every time I see them press the button for the defense budget, or what do we call Department of War budget, they are benefiting personally and financially. Again, my colleagues should not be able to use their positions of power to get rich from defense contractors while voting to pass more funding to bomb people. This is corruption at its core, and this is why, the Stop Politicians Profiting War Act to ban members of Congress and their families from owning stock in war manufacturing should be part of this movement. And as you all know, the Trump administration, we talked about this, is ripping food assistance. I was today at the Redford Township. It's a neighboring community outside of Detroit. Interfaith, they run a food pantry, and talking about what they're going to be able to do and showing up for our neighborhoods. We're talking about healthcare and basic social safety nets for working people. It seems that Congress continues to, without hesitation, invest in more in bombs, detention camps, genocide, and so much more. So at a time when we need to negotiate new arms control treaties and work together to confront shared crises like climate change and global pandemics, my colleagues continue with no hesitation to push for military buildup and a new Cold War with China. The rhetoric is there. It's going to get stronger. The less, again, the more we can continue to push from the outside in. In Detroit, Grace Lee Boggs and so many advocates and community mothers have taught me, and I need you all to know this. Yes, I'm in Congress, but transformative change in our country, from the anti-war movement to fighting for Civil Rights Act to getting to be able to organize unions in the workplace, did not come because somebody in Congress woke up and said, wow, that's a really good idea. It's when people boycotted, they marched, and they demanded from the outside in. This is an institution that will not move until we make them move. Both Republicans and Democrats, you guys, are addicted to war. And until that changes, the risk of nuclear arms race looms large over all of us. So again, I know it's absolutely terrifying, especially with who's president of the United States right now. But I want you all to use, again, the power that you have to raise your voices, be a bullhorn, and push from the outside in. And again, that's the only time in our history, in our country, that we've seen transformative change. And again, I know this especially, no one should have the power that the president currently has, planning a regime change war in Venezuela like this, who has vowed that he is, quote, what, just going to kill people in the Caribbean, who has enabled nuclear armed power to commit, literally genocide in Palestine. That's why, again, it's important we get more members of Congress to support HRES 317. And please know I'm remain completely committed to complete and total abolition of all nuclear weapons, abolishing all of it. Our struggle, and of course, right now, our movements, and we're connecting our movements, and I heard that on this call, and I appreciate that. But again, the urgency that we need to move, again, is so clear, and must keep pushing from the outside in. I'm so incredibly honored to be in this movement with all of you. Sometimes I'm jealous, and I know it's really weird. I wish I was on the outside pushing in, and sometimes I am out there. Um, because on the inside, it just chips at your soul to see so many people, with the majority of my colleagues millionaires, the majority of them owning stocks, and all from the broken, inhumane healthcare system to the war manufacturing system to the war machine, I call it, to a number of, folks that right now in my colleagues who own stock in some of the private detention and mass incarceration schemes in our country. You all give me hope. So I pray and hope that that there are people like myself and others that you give credibility to, that is speaking, and trying to, raise the alarms, of the fact that, this is incredibly dangerous. And people need to understand again, how the majority of Americans are with us on this. And again, we got to get louder, and we got to get much more aggressive, in getting these resolutions passed, and getting, again, a resolution to this that really truly protects our communities. Again, thank you for allowing me to share space with all of you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, and really appreciated just quickly that your kind of de-emphasis of the role of the member of Congress, right? Because a lot of us are here because we love to hear you speak, and our list is really revved up about you for many good reasons. But we cannot rely on a savior, right? We gotta organize ourselves, our people, and demand more for ourselves for the future. Um, Also want to just say broadly, and I know this is gratitude from our list as well, and the folks on this call, just thank you for standing with communities that are calling for restraint and humanity in U.S. national security policy at home and abroad. We really need champions like you in Congress now more than ever. Um, and we've gotten related questions from the audience. Congresswoman, you're more than welcome to stay for the Q&A and even answer some as well. But you also don't have to. We're super grateful for your time. Um, we're finally going to get to these questions from the audience, and you can continue to drop them right in the Q&A box, and we'll get through as many as we can. Um, First of all, it seems to many of us that there are almost no members of Congress working in the public interest anymore, and our executive branch is actively harming us. Where can we turn? And is there hope to lobby Congress and the president? I know that may be a core assumption that some of us work on, that you can lobby Congress and that you can build power that way. But just turning it to the panelists, what is your take on that? And I'm looking at Ellen as
Yeah,
well.
I'll quickly respond. I guess what I will say is Politico released a really interesting piece a few days ago about how the Trump administration is fundamentally changing lobbying, right? And so some of the more corporate interest lobbying, for example, has really turned towards figuring out ways to directly influence the administration, primarily through, for lack of a better term, bribing some of, Trump's friends and bribing some of Trump's team in order to get policy agendas set. I think that while that is a sign that some believe Congress carries less weight in the security of specific policy interests, I do think that's actually an opportunity for us, right? I think that in them leaving the space and leaving the Hill, there is more opportunities for groups who care about the public interest to get meetings with members of Congress. I have noticed just in this most recent effort to get meetings on this issue specifically that I've been able to secure more meetings than ever, even in the government shutdown. And I think that speaks to less and less people trying to reach out to members of Congress all the time. So I think we have to be creative, and more importantly, I think members of Congress are increasingly feeling aware that they have surrendered some level of power to the executive branch and are looking for ways to reclaim that power. And I think we should be allies in helping them do that.
Thank you, Ellen. We certainly do have some allies in Congress, and definitely there are some ways to dig in our heels on this.
Yeah. Do
Um,
you know that a lot of the effectiveness of advocacy is work the district? They don't like it when you show up at your town halls. Like, I know it's really great to come to Washington, D.C. and lobby and come and do the rallies and everything. And I, of course, I like when I see you all there, but I think the effectiveness, and I saw this with the genocide, I saw this on immigration issues regarding Dreamers, early on in my organizing work that I did in Detroit, that when we showed up to the events, people were asking about SNAP cuts, they were asking about Medicaid, and they're asking about this. And again, I think doing it in that public setting and making it an issue and bringing it up over and over again, so publicly and so grand. And again, depends on whether or not more, I'm watching more and more colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, doing less town halls because they don't want to be asked about genocide. But I can tell you that it's been a very effective way, especially because it's just people that they might not typically think is going to ask them the question. And it's like, hey, I want to ask you about this, but also about, why aren't you supporting that? Is there a reason? And again, you could do it very effectively in that way. And say, well, great. Okay. Sounds like you need more time to look at it because they usually will say that. Say, who in your office can I follow up with? And so I really think, again, the outside agitation in really will make a difference. It can move. I've seen a colleague move because he just couldn't get away with people coming to his community and wanting him to support, DACA for Dreamers. And so I just would reiterate to, especially because again, you can organize and work your backyard, and Maylene sees it. It can agitate and move folks. I know it's not fast enough though. I'm one of those that I wish it could happen first time or second time, but it takes some time and we can move them.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And Maylene, if you want to jump in with any more on the engagement ladder, don't want to put you on the spot, but also want to give you the opportunity there if you wanted to add some color to that. But otherwise, we can move on to another question.
No, yeah, I just wanted to echo everything that Representative said and Allen said, but it is true. You got to engage folks on the ground level, and I've seen it work firsthand. Getting the constituents, getting the people who are not able to go to DC and talk to their members of Congress, getting the people who are your neighbors, folks who don't know about this movement, to ask those questions to we've had some folks who have joined our meetings who have been to those town halls, and the member of Congress that they're speaking to just like it's like, oh yes, I remember you. So it's important for folks to get involved in their small communities. But yeah.
Thank you. Also wanted to zoom in on this question in the chat, which is, could any of you talk about what leadership from the U.S. on arms control should actually look like right now, beyond renewing treaties? Is there more that we should be pushing for? And the Congresswoman has given us a big hint with HRES 317. But what does that say? What does that do? What are we being asked to push for?
I can just quickly say there are multiple resolution efforts. There are multiple bills that members of Congress introduced that want to change nuclear weapons policy in the United States in some sensible, common sense ways. Not just the resolutions that were highlighted on this call or that are currently the focus of the efforts of advocacy this week. The most important thing is that when a member of Congress supports any of these efforts, they get on the record as a supporter of arms control being good for national security and for Americans. And so, to me, as we approach February, we need to be doing everything in our power to get members of Congress on the record in some sense that nuclear weapons are dangerous. I think that to give Mary credit, Rika's recent win was a version of that, right? It was Congress admitting that nuclear weapons harmed Americans, and that they carried weight that they had to compensate, to people who were harmed. I think that's immensely helpful. But we only have a limited amount of time to get members of Congress on the record in support of this goal, so that if there is a follow-on agreement to New START that's proposed in the next year and a half, let's say, there are members of Congress that have already done a positive action on this, and then the pitch of ratifying and supporting a new agreement will not be such a hard sell based on previous actions.
Yeah, and can I just say, I do think we need to keep reminding them that nuclear weapons affected people across this entire country. It just wasn't the West. It was every state got some level of radiation from nuclear weapons testing. And there are numerous sites across the country where weapon waste is stored, where weapons were produced, and they're still living with the contamination from that. So I just think reminding them of what this whole chain has done to Americans across this country will make them sit up. I don't think they realize that at all.
Absolutely. I think the conversation in DC has definitely been restricted to a very uh, kind of meat and potatoes deterrence logic, which we won't dig into today because we do not have the time. Um, but it's definitely taken a front and center role rather than what we do know about nuclear weapons, which are many stories of harm from multiple different fronts. I think we have time for one more question. And I see a very active Q&A box. So thank you so much, folks, for staying engaged. And we'll give you an opportunity at the very end to so you can actually get another menu of items actually, and you'll get that after this call as well. But wanted to hone in on this one question. Um, are there any current grassroots efforts or policy wins in cities or states that folks might be able to plug into?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Um, it so the Back from the Brink campaign is like a national effort. So there's hubs across the country in multiple different states, cities, just community folks working in their small communities to help affect change, whether that's on the level of like on the municipal level, or whether it's on the federal level. Everything is interconnected. And I represent the Los Angeles hub of Back from the Brink, and we have been working with our partners across the state in California. So there's 4 hubs in California: Fresno, Los Angeles, Sacramento/Davis, and the Bay Area, San Francisco. And we have been working together to how as a state, how we can impact change, because California is a huge state and we have the most members of Congress, that being 52. And so how can our collective efforts together shape federal policy, or move California in general? Like, how can we um, organize as a hub and organize the people on the ground in California who don't know anything about this issue? And so a lot of different states are doing this. We have, I want to say, over 20 hubs now across the country. Um, and everyone's doing great work. Everyone's doing work that's a little bit different. But at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, which is to abolish nuclear weapons. And what that looks like for a certain community is different than another community. We just help give tools that folks can use, but you can do anything you want, whether it's put on an event, talk to your local elected officials. That's one thing we're doing right now. It's our local elected official sign-on letter. And with that, we have around like 89 to 90 who have signed on already, and we're using that to build leadership. That's a way for us to find who our leaders are, who we can go to in government to speak on about this issue, to help urge their colleagues to take a stance on this issue. Um, a, a, a good person who just signed on was Majority Leader of the California State Senate, State Legislature, Cecilia Aguilar Curry, just signed on to her letter, and she's been a big leader in this movement. She has been speaking out for our campaign against nuclear weapons. And so that is one way we're building leadership and showing that the public wants this. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Maylene. And I shared that link in the chat, preventnuclearwar.org/sign-up. And sometimes it starts with just having a small group of people that you can call a hub, and then go to a town hall meeting. Start with HRES 317, start with HRES 100, what have you. And then you can start making more asks, making more demands, asking more questions as well. Sometimes you can start with that. So with that, I know there are a lot more questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all, but I wanted to close us out with a potential action for you all. And I'll wait a moment while the slide is being pulled up. But all of our speakers today have made it pretty clear. This isn't policy for policy's sake. It's about whether we choose to invest in life or in annihilation, whether we let this kind of cycle of fear and militarism continue, or whether we decide enough is enough. And there are many different issues where you could say the same thing. Are we going to let this cycle continue? And so we've mentioned HRES 317, HRES 100. We have it up on the screen here. HRES 100 is basically for members of Congress to express that they want our limits to stay the same. We want to keep nuclear weapons capped. We have plenty of them. We don't need more. HRES 317 is Congress's way of saying, we actually do want to get rid of all of these per our commitments to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But you don't have to say all that. You can just say what's right here on the screen, whether your member of Congress has co-sponsored the piece of legislation or not. I'm deeply concerned that the last agreement limiting the US in Russia's nuclear weapons will expire in just 100 days, or what have you, or in less than 100 days, since you might not be calling tonight. If the government was not shut down, I would ask you to call the Capitol switchboard right now and leave a voicemail at your representative's office. Unfortunately, the switchboard is not operating because of the shutdown.
Ah,
So you'll have to check this link, tinyurl.com/findyourmocongress to find your member of Congress. And then you can type in DC phone number after that, and you can call that up, leave a voicemail in the morning, or right now if you already know it. Otherwise, we will be sending a petition to your inboxes within 24 hours, and you can basically sign what this says and have it sent over to your member of Congress if you are phone shy. But we encourage you all to make those phone calls and also to show up in person to these town hall meetings and corner these folks. And otherwise, if you are not already, you can also sign up as an individual or organization endorser to reversethearmsrace.org. That will also help you kind of stay in contact with us if you so wish to. If you don't want to, don't worry, we won't spam you. But if you really want to get involved and have substantive policy questions, organizing questions as well, because grassroots organizing is not easy, please do sign up as an endorser, and we'll be sharing contact info as well. You could also share tonight's event, but otherwise, join the coalition, keep on organizing, keep on educating, keep on showing up. We're really grateful for you all and keep on fighting for the future that we all deserve. Otherwise, I hope you all have a lovely night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye. Watching people trickle off. Bye.